Okay, today I want to make a few reflections about boarding school and whether our parents have gone to boarding school. What might the impact be? You might not have gone to boarding school yourself, but you now realize that actually my parents did, or my mother or my father did. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about that today. How might that impact you as a child and then the adult you become? So thank you. So, over the last month or so, I have been traveling quite a lot. I've been off to some festivals, I have been to see friends, I have been to different places in the UK, and I've noticed that I've met or spoken with quite a lot of people whose parents went to boarding school. They didn't necessarily go to boarding school themselves, but their parents did. And at a festival I went to about 3 weeks ago, I was sat at one point and this lady shared the father's name, and I said, and she was saying father's like this, and I said, did he go to boarding school? And she's like, yes. And then another of the women I was with says, oh, mine did too. And then another one, oh, mine did too. And then the man we were with said, oh, my grandfather went. So there was 5 of us whose parents had all been, or grandparents had been, to boarding school. And I was just sharing a few of the symptoms of boarding school syndrome. So anxiety or workaholism, struggle to stop, emotional repression, or difficulty sharing emotion, wanting to isolate, disconnect. And as I was sharing them, they're like, wow, that's my dad, each of them. And so what I wanted to talk a little bit about today is just that we might have grown up with parents who we just thought that was the way they were. But actually, what comes to the surface is when you realize the principles around boarding school syndrome, you realize your parents often are like the way they are because of their education, because of how they grew up. And what then that does for ourselves as the children is that we pick up some of those traits. So we think it's normal for there to be distance from our parents, or from relationships. We think it's normal. If, say, our father went to boarding school and our mother didn't, then we have that balance. So for me and my family, my father went to boarding school, my mother didn't, and my mother grew up. Most of her brothers, her father, were at boarding school. So still that kind of that element there. So I think that there can be that balance, but we're going to pick up some of these traits, and we might just think, oh, well, I've just picked them up because that's how my parents were. But there's actually an underlying thing that, these are the similarities of some of the symptoms of, of boarding school syndrome. So yeah, I just think, if you did grow up with parents like that, is, I think, by you exploring this, to have the conversations with them. I've heard stories over the last few months of people saying, and their parents saying, oh, I loved it. I loved boarding school. And then when you actually ask them to tell you what actually happened, you realize they've normalized it. But actually what they went through was abuse, it was neglect, they were beaten. And because they've never told the stories, they've just kind of, in their minds, just gone, oh, that's just normal, because that's what they saw around them. They just said, oh, this is what happens in these environments. And then We learn not to speak up. And so by having a conversation with your father or your mother and just going, what was it actually like? I just want to learn. And they might be resistant, but it might be just to say, this would just help me understand myself. And by them sharing, it can be quite cathartic. And sometimes I feel when we hear our parents' stories, it's like our hearts open and soften to go, wow, they were really difficult. And there was a reason they were really difficult. This is what they went through as a child. The more that I do the research into boarding school, I see that it is a complex trauma. It's complex PTSD, a developmental trauma. As I think it's a definition I got from online. I think it was Gabor Mate saying developmental trauma is repeated or prolonged exposure to adversity during development, such as abuse, neglect, or being raised in a chaotic or unpredictable environment. That's boarding school for me. It's unpredictable. You have no idea. You've got 50 kids for one adult, so you're on high alert all the time. It's unpredictable. There's often abuse. There's certainly a lot of neglect in the stories I've read. And it's prolonged. It goes on. We don't know how long it's going to last. And there's that feeling of not feeling safe. So I think that for me, if you're a child of a boarding school survivor, it's to start the heart to soften. It might have been difficult growing up with them, as it was for me with my dad. I've told this story many times, but on his deathbed, I said to him, Dad, I felt like you've hated me my whole life. And he burst into tears at that point, and he said, no, Piers, I do love you. My whole life's been a lie, an act. And it's powerful for us to hear that, to have that courage to just say, let's have this conversation. And I'm so glad that I did have that conversation with him, because he died a few days later. So I think, sometimes we can feel powerless, but actually, with the internet now, I've interviewed 136, 137 now, different people, not just about boarding school, but there's the resources there that you can direct your parents to go, have a look at this. Episode number 10 is with Joy Shavrian. Episode 9 on my podcast is with Alex Renton. I think it's episode 22 or 23 is with Nick Duffel. And I interview him again. It's just a chance for us to go, oh. Or there's the documentary, Boarding on Insanity. I have a few friends who've shown their parents these films, the film, and gone, wow, okay. And it's given them these insights. So, I just think it has affected your parents. If they went to boarding school, you didn't, and therefore it's affected you. And yet we can heal, and one of the ways is just by talking about this, asking them the questions. What was it like? Were you in an open dormitory? What was the food like? What were the other people like? Did you see bullying? I spoke with Dr. Paul Miller, psychiatrist, which went live on Friday. And although we didn't talk about that in the conversation, in one of his talks online, he talks about mirror neurons. Is when we see someone else being hit, our brains are as deeply affected as the person being hit. And so these types of things, when we hear the stories, we can get, they can get that understanding, we can get that understanding as well. So just some reflections there. And I've got a podcast going live, a guy called Neil Harding talking about his experiences of boarding school in New Zealand and how he's spent the last decade or so campaigning against Dilworth to try and get them to to take responsibility for what was up to about 300 people abused in the school. So just it was a powerful conversation, and so yeah, that will go live on Friday, and then I've got another podcast going live the week after, and that's going to be talking about plant medicines. And Paul Miller talked a bit about that, the psychiatrist. They're doing a lot more research into how effective are they with mental health and trauma. So yeah, so if you have any questions, please do let me know. But yeah, just some reflections about parents who went to boarding school.